Do you want to know what I wish someone told me a year ago as I was preparing for my software developer job interviews? You need to get good at telling great short stories. Not just any short story, but stories that captivate your audience's attention and emotions, and they leave them wanting to know more about you as a person. I know what you're thinking. What the hell is this guy talking about? A software developer telling stories. I didn't go to college for 4 years to get a computer science degree just to hear that I should have majored in English literature. But the thing is, this doesn't just apply to software development interviews. Many people preparing for most job interviews dedicate the majority of their time and energy into the technical portion of the interview and only spend about a fraction of that time remaining preparing for the personality and behavioral portion. When I say technical portion of the interview, I mean the parts of the job you're applying for that require a targeted assessment designed to evaluate your applied job skills, knowledge of your field, and problem-solving capabilities. When I say personality and behavioral portion of the interview, I mean the questions designed to test how well you can communicate with others and designed to reveal deeper parts of your character that the technical portion of the interview simply cannot assess. One of the most common personality questions interviewers want to see you answer well is, tell me about a time you had a conflict with someone in a team setting. What was the conflict and how did it get resolved? This question in particular can reveal so much about a candidate, and it can sometimes be the tipping point that determines whether you get the job offer or not. But the issue is that most people don't spend enough time thinking about these questions and actually practicing the responses out loud. What I think most people should be doing is splitting up their interview preparation time evenly. Half your time and energy goes to technical studying, and the other half goes to personality questions and getting good at telling short stories about your own personal life. When I myself shifted my focus more towards telling good short stories, that's when I aced my interview and I got a job at the company I currently work for as an entry-level software developer. And here's the funny joke. Remember how we all thought that AI was going to replace all of our jobs? Well, companies that laid off workers for AI are reversing that decision, and they are now rehiring for the roles they were once firing for. One Forbes article wrote that 29% of companies that cut staff for AI have already rehired. What this means is that among all the doom and gloom surrounding the job market, there's still a very good chance for you, my friend, to get a job as a software developer at a company in 2026. So companies want a future software developer or just someone who is technically trained, but who can also talk well with others, communicate ideas well, and equally as important, they want a future employee that can tell good anecdotal stories at a high level. When I say tell anecdotal stories, I do mean actual stories. Now, lucky for you, you don't have to be an English major to tell a good short story about your own life. There's a lot of great advice about acing the behavioral portion of the interview available on the internet. But the simplest and most effective one that's worked for me is to remember this simple acronym, C.A.R., standing for context, action, and result. Just simply remember CAR. Now let's start with C, or context. Anytime an interviewer asks you a question to tell something about yourself, what they really want is for you to list out every detail of the story that has to be known before you can go further explaining what happened. For example, who are the people involved in this story? What was the project that you were working on? And most importantly, what was the key problem or conflict in this story? The next part of our acronym is A, standing for action. This is simply what you did in your situation and how did you respond to said conflict. This might be the most important part of your entire job interview because the interviewer or the hiring manager wants to know how do you respond to problems, disagreements, or conflict, and ultimately they want to see how do you go about resolving said problems, disagreements, or conflicts. Are you quick to listen to others' opinions? Are you too afraid to voice your own opinions when you know something is going to go wrong? Are you quick to take over a team and start bossing everyone else around? Do you just sit back and let other people do all the work for you? These are all questions that the hiring manager is seeking answers to whenever he asks you these behavioral questions. Lastly, we have R, standing for result. Put simply, this is the end result of what happened in your story. It doesn't have to be some crazy epiphany about the secrets of the universe being revealed to you. It could just be something like, well, the project didn't turn out how we wanted it to, but I learned a valuable lesson of patience, for example. It could be, anything, but there does need to be a lesson involved. No good story is complete without a valuable lesson that was learned. So don't cheap out on this section of your answer and make sure it's a lesson you authentically believe in. And here's the thing now. Hiring managers know that humans aren't as technically skilled as AI anymore. I mean, we passed that point a long time ago. And I don't think there's an expectation for you to be either. On the other hand, what they are expecting is for someone like you to have exceptional or even just above average communication skills compared to the average Joe in computer science, or hell, the average Gen Z person for that matter. There's this well-known stereotype that exists among the computer science community, and that is that of the Mark Zuckerberg coding prodigy archetype. What I mean by that is someone who may be exceptional at coding and designing software, but they are socially handicapped. And what I mean by this is that they just can't communicate well with others. Now, I know this is just a stereotype, and there's always exceptions out there, but there is a reason it still exists, and that's because it's at least partially true. Let me give you a practical example of this that actually happened at my company this last week, in fact. So there's a hiring manager at this company called ABC Insurance. And funny enough, they are actually looking to hire an entry-level software developer to work on their insurance policy writing systems. Now, I know that you're already falling asleep, probably whenever you heard the word insurance, but stay with me here, because there's real developer jobs that exist and make good money at places like insurance companies. Anyways, they can only hire one new developer, and there's two candidates that show tons of promise for the new position. The hiring manager must choose between one of these two candidates. Candidate 1 has a decent, good-looking resume that presents his skills and technical abilities fairly well. Candidate 2 has a stellar-looking resume with what appears to be far more technical ability than Candidate 1. However, when the time to interview rolls around, Candidate 1 does something that shocks the hiring manager. Candidate 1 has this strange ability to tell a really good personal story. And when he's asked questions like, "Tell me about a time you had a problem working in a team environment," the hiring manager becomes emotionally involved with the story of Candidate 1 because he is such a good storyteller. Candidate 1 was able to strike the perfect storytelling balance of presenting the facts of the situation, but also not getting too bogged down in the details. Candidate 1 was also able to clearly communicate the conflict and heart of the story, how he went about solving that conflict, and why he did it the way he did. Just as importantly, he also communicated what lessons he learned from that story, because as we already know, the best stories always have a good lesson learned. Now, because of his expert storytelling ability, the hiring manager actually became emotionally involved in Candidate 1's life, albeit for just a brief period of time, but it was enough to leave a lasting impression on the hiring manager. When the time came, though, for Candidate 2 to answer that same question of, "Tell me about a time you had a problem working in a team environment," he is so caught off guard and he's just simply not prepared. He expected the hiring manager to just ask him questions about API endpoints and solving coding problems in C.A.R. So what happens to Candidate 2 is he just isn't as prepared for the question, and so he stumbles through it. He tells some contrived story about how he worked in a group project where he didn't click well with the other group members and they were all lazy, and he was the one who had to do all the dirty work and finish the project on time. He also fails to present the facts clearly of the situation. He fails to explain what exactly the conflict is or why he didn't click well with the other group members. And he didn't even think to explain what lessons he learned from that conflict, and he showed a complete lack of deep reflection on that situation. At the end of the day, the hiring manager is way more impressed now with Candidate 1 than he is with Candidate 2. Despite the fact that Candidate 2 could code circles and explain any and every programming concept in the dictionary compared to Candidate 1. However, at the end of the day, it's Candidate 1, the one with less technical ability, but better communication and storytelling ability that gets the job offer, and not Candidate 2. Candidate 1 is now making tons and tons of money now. So this actually happened at the company I work for, literally last week. Obviously, every company is different, and what I say for the company I work for may not be true for another company's hiring criteria. I still do firmly believe that most hiring managers know how well AI has evened the playing field for most computer science graduates. So the best way to stand out from the crowd is to prove to them you offer more skills than just coding, because that's replaceable anyways. What isn't replaceable is the person behind the keyboard and how well they're able to work well with others. That's where companies take on most of the risk when hiring new grads. They're not as worried about,
Well, does he know how to write a function in Python?
No.
because AI will do it 10 times better than you anyways. What they want to really know about these future candidates is that they can communicate with the skills of a grown adult. That's where they'll get the most value out of you. Anyone can code an app nowadays, but not everyone can prove to hiring managers that they're pleasant to work with and be around, interesting to talk to, and good at talking to other people face to face, and maybe even performing some public speaking. And here's another harsh truth that some people just don't like to admit. If you're good at telling stories in life, no matter if it's at work or if it's at some kickback with friends, people are going to like you more if you can deliver a great story to your audience. If you've ever met like an older guy who has tons of experience in life and he knows how to talk about that experience through telling some kind of banger of a story that has you on the edge of your seat wanting to know what happens next, then chances are you're going to really like that guy. The same is true for how the hiring manager views you. If you can get him hooked on a personal story that actually happened in your own life, even if it's answering an interview question, then he's going to like you more than the other guy who fumbled through that same question and just didn't know how to answer it. Okay, so I was reading this one book the other day, and I promise this is relevant to the topic of this video. It was called Thinking 101. And in the first chapter, the author talks about how we think we are so good at something just because we can imagine doing it in our brains. In reality, though, this couldn't be further from the truth. We are absolutely terrible at being objective and realistic towards our own skill ability if we've been exposed to something enough, but we haven't physically tried it. So in this book, the author is a professor at Yale or some other university, and she performs a test on her students to prove this theory that we think we can do something just because we have exposure to it. She has two groups of students perform the same goal of dancing to a K-pop song that follows the same moves of the original music video. So there's two groups, right? One group gets to watch the music video once, and the other group gets to watch it multiple times. And the second group also gets a follow-up video that shows step by step how to perform the dance. So, as you can imagine, the second group of people were far more confident in their ability to perform the dance than the first group, which only got to see it once. But when the time came to perform the dance, guess which group of students performed better? So the answer is actually neither. They both absolutely sucked at the dance and failed miserably when the time came to actually perform. And there's so many other examples of this throughout the book that prove that just because we have exposure to something mentally, it doesn't mean at all that we're going to perform as good as we think we might. Why am I saying all of this? I'm saying all of this because you need to take the time and practice to not just expose yourself to how you want to answer these personal and behavioral questions, but you need to either record yourself on the phone answering them or talk to yourself out loud in a mirror. And I know what you're thinking. Rewatching a recording of yourself speaking on camera, one of the most cringe things a human being can endure. But take it from someone who's trying to be a YouTuber right now. You'll live. And thank yourself later when you smash that interview and make tons and tons of money. Hopefully this video helps someone out there getting a new job in the age of AI. Anyways, that's it for the video. Please subscribe, guys. We're trying to get to 100 subscribers. And yeah, that's it. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.